Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I am honored to have John Cotter back on the show. He's the author of the memoir Losing Music, portions of which have appeared in Raritan, Catapult, Indiana Review, and Guernica. And his novel Under the Small Lights came out in 2010 and published by Miami University Press. Back in 2022, he spent some time in Connecticut as the resident fellow at the James Merrill House. This is his second appearance on the podcast, and I'm just delighted to have you back.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tammy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Your memoir, which I've had a chance to read some of, but not had a chance to finish yet, is wonderful. Losing Music. It's coming out shortly from Milkweed Press. Do you have an exact date for us?
We do, April 11th.
Are you going to do anything fun to celebrate on the big day?
Well, we're going to give a reading. The book's first appearance will be at Bank Square Books in Mystic, Connecticut. I feel very sleazy now that I'm plugging something that I'm promoting. So I'm not very good at self-promotion. You don't have to buy a copy of the book if you're in Mystic. You can just come and listen to the reading and say hi. I imagine most of your listeners won't be in Mystic, Connecticut, although you never know. I'll be reading with the New London Days, Rick Coster. And then a couple of days after that, on the evening of the 15th, we're going to be in New York City with Matt Salisis at Books Are Magic, which I'm super excited about. April 28th, we're going to be in Denver, Colorado at the Lighthouse Writers Workshop. And in the coming days and weeks, there'll be any number of stops. We're going to stop in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we'll be in Iowa City. And we have an event scheduled in Boston, Newton, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston at Newtonville Books, where I launched my last book. I'm so excited to go back to Newtonville with Teju Cole, who is a brilliant writer and has written, I think, very movingly about music. He has this wonderful essay in his new collection, Black Paper, about Brahms and about other things as well, but also Brahms. And it got me listening to some Brahms, which I was very absorbed by. So Losing Music is the story of my disability journey, I suppose. I had this strange, mysterious condition that reduced me several years ago. It caused my hearing to cut out and return. It caused these very strange noises to well up inside of my head, buzzing, hissing, whistling. It made the room tilt and list away. It felt like things were flying through the air. It felt like I was falling. This went on for years. I had to quit work. I had to quit writing. My personal life was in jeopardy. We looked all over for a cure. And that's where the book begins. It's not a book about navigating illness, although in a sense it is. It's about searching for meaning in life when the life you've planned is not the life you're going to live. It's searching for meaning in life when you live at the whim of luck, of fate, of mere chance, and figuring out how to have courage and how to move forward in the face of these uncontrollable events. And it's also about music. It's about the things that music has meant to me and has meant to, some of the other people, some of the other characters I meet in the book.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm very excited for that to hit the bookshelves because I think there's so many people, musicians and non-musicians alike, who will find it fascinating to hear about your story.
Thank you so much for saying so. I hope so too.
So you've done, quite a bit of work in the arts, both as a theater director and an educator, and of course, a writer. Are you taking any time off after your book comes out to just relax, or are you hitting the ground running with some other projects?
Well, the big project is we're moving to Providence. We're closing on a house in a week. Hopefully, I shouldn't tempt fate. I don't know. Maybe things will have gone pear-shaped by the time this appears. We're relocating, and that'll be a project. But yeah, I'm going to try to keep writing. There's a book of short stories. I shouldn't, the gods laugh when we brag about our collection of short stories. But there's a collection of short stories that we're going to maybe see if we can find a home for. And yeah, I have possibly a novel planned, and maybe another memoir or something like a memoir collection of autobiographical pieces. I don't know. It's all in very early stages, and it's all very sort of inchoate. When you've got a book coming out, you think to yourself, well, that's okay. I'll just keep working on my other projects. But it has such momentum. It just picks you up and carries you along. I've been writing some sort of essays to appear here and there to kind of coincide with the publication of the book. But not only that, I've been going through the text with an X-Acto knife and trying to sort of carve out excerpts that we can place here or there. There's an excerpt just came out in Guernica last week about sound dynamics, about how sound moves through the air, the barriers it comes up against, and how sound moves through your head. And when I was first fitted with hearing aids and the kind of the sort of the trauma of that, feeling as though, suddenly I was the thing in a room that didn't belong. I was the person who needed extra accommodations. I was the person who had to ask for his back against the wall. I was the one who had to ask for people to repeat themselves. And how you get used to that over time, which I did, and which I now feel, no sense of embarrassment about saying, please speak up, or saying, oh, well, I'm deaf, I can't hear you. But, there's no magic pill that makes you bold, makes you feel as though, okay, it doesn't matter, I can do these things. It's a process of attrition. It's a process of sort of training yourself to think about things differently. And it creates a kind of psychological vertigo, because you realize that all these conditions for life that we presuppose are modular. That all these preconditions, that these rules that we give ourselves that we're living by, we can change them.
I noticed you said that, you're getting bolder about saying what you need, but does it still kind of like stab you a little bit in the heart when you have to say those things?
Depends on the situation. Depends on what, if I'm with old friends and, if I'm with old friends and we're all, showing up at a restaurant together, it doesn't bother me at all to just point. I mean, I have a lot of shorthand about it now. Just point, say, I have to sit there. You have to move over here. Say that again. Don't look at me when don't take that roll out of your mouth while you're talking to me. This is not difficult for me at all. When people take a long time to understand, it becomes awkward. If you say to someone, I'm deaf, and they say, oh, so am I. Well, maybe they are, but maybe they're not, and maybe they're just trying to be friendly, or you say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just not able to hear you in this environment, and they say, oh, that's okay, and then they just continue talking the way they had before. I didn't come on here to grumble, but it's certainly, I wouldn't say embarrassing. No, I'm past the point of embarrassment with all this, because because of necessity, because this is how I have to live my life, and I only get the one, so I have to. It's like when you're a parent and you have a child crying in public, maybe, one option is you get embarrassed. Okay. But I think most parents would just say, fuck it. I'm not embarrassed. This is my child is important. I have to look after the child, and I have to navigate my way through the world. And there's no, if I have to ask someone to repeat themselves, or I have to ask, to walk into another room where I can hear them better. Well, there's nothing, I can't waste my time feeling bad about that, but it can be awkward. Sure. Yeah, it can be awkward. Could I read you a passage from the book about that?
I would love that.
To create a bond of intimacy, we lower our voice. In a room full of shouting kids, their mother will sotto voce the adult stuff into my ear. She's establishing intimacy, wry mutuality. But precisely because the kids are shouting, whatever she tells me is lost. I say what and miss it a second time. I never do find out. Incidentals, the definition of low stakes, but still. My favorite barista confides in me out of habit. We like each other, we joke. So when I walk in, he comes up to the counter to confess out of range of his boss's hearing, out of mind of the other patrons. He lowers his voice, even moves his lips as little as he can get away with. Every time I remind myself it's the opposite of unfriendly. I'm invited into the conspiracy. But like a narc, I say, I'm sorry, what? I tell him again that I'm hard of hearing, and he nods and says, me too. Lots of people do that. So you amp it. I'm deaf. And their fellow feeling diminishes. Not at all. Oh, totally, I'm deaf too. The word has no meaning. The world remains an arm's length off. Gossip, caveats, you miss these. A wave of the hand. It's not important. It doesn't matter. Texture. My life in whispers. James Bond films when I was a kid. The mystery woman who warns him, you're in danger here. My mother, hushed about what was wrong with Peg. It's cancer. My mom and dad on Christmas Eve. Murmurs drifting upstairs. I heard the rustle of boxes and paper being set beneath the tree. My father's low voice. There's a lot this year, and the way that thrilled me. I talk about how loud bars are no good unless they're really loud, in which case they're great, because you can take your hearing aids off and join the democracy. And I talk about how lowering my voice, whispering to someone, used to be a way of setting yourself apart from the world, creating this little cave of space, this little cave of silence that you were in together. And of course, that's gone now too. So you have to find other things. You have to goof around and shout. There's no other way.
Mm. Do you feel like a part of your life has gone missing, or is it just evolved?
More the latter. I mean, to some extent, it's a distinction of language, but I think of myself as being a different person. I think that the person I used to be is gone, because the mind and the body are not separate. We don't need to entertain these Cartesian fripperies. I think the body is the mind, and the mind is the body. They're one. And when the body changes, the mind changes. And the self changes, because where is the self located? And so I think in the same way that we used to be children and now we're someone else, for all intents and purposes, even though we retain a lot of the same memories and we retain this, what's the word I'm looking for? This nostalgic relationship with our previous self. I think this person that I was 15 years ago is just gone. And I've become the person he was afraid he would become, but I'm not afraid.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. And I love that you read from your book. It's so telling about culture and society, and how I guess I never stopped to think about how exclusive whispering really is.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I happen to have a lot of friends with a variety of hearing issues. And even in my work, many people have hearing aids or are hard of hearing. So I find myself talking louder, clearer, enunciating more, just even in my regular everyday outside of work. And it's interesting. I'm more cognizant of, okay, is this space too loud? Do I need to talk louder for whomever I'm with, whether they have a hearing issue or not?
That's right. And it's a loss. I mean, not being able to have this, not being able to explore that dynamism of sound is a loss. And I think we can look it square in the face and say it's a loss.
Mm-hmm.
I think we use a lot of euphemisms, and we try to sort of make people feel a bit better about what they're going through. And so we say, oh, well, you'll hear differently with the hearing aids. No, you'll hear worse. But, okay, get used to it. I think we can look at it a little more squarely. Shouting can be a kind of intimacy too. I think about when I was a kid, I was a pretty unruly kid. And when I was out with my friends in public, we would shout at each other. And it was a way of separating ourselves. It was a way of distinguishing ourselves from the lame 9 to 5ers around us who were too uptight to shout. It was a way of signaling that we were where the energy was. And I think any change in volume or in intonation will do this. It's not exclusive to whispering. So I'll see, if you're at dinner with 8 people and you're having a conversation with one person, but you need to have a little side conversation with someone else, you don't necessarily whisper, just something in the consistency of your voice that changes. Don't you think?
Yeah, very good point. So music obviously has a large space in your heart and in your life. And, even the title of your memoir, Losing Music. If it's not too painful, what is an art or who is an artist that you miss listening to from before all of this happened?
Oh gosh. Well, you can't really hear the textures of music in the same way that you used to. So I've lost low sounds more than I've lost high ones. So what's tricky for me is the bass. What's tricky for me are drums, particularly, bass drums, that sort of thing. Uh, Soft parts of music, the piano part of the pianoforte, but not the forte part. Voices that dip below 40 decibels or below 60 decibels are difficult for me to hear. So quite a bit of the range of music. So it's changed what I've listened to. I don't listen to piano music like I used to. I used to have this recording of Till Fellner playing these different Bach pieces on piano, and they were beautiful, but they were too soft. They're too soft. I can't hear them anymore. I used to listen to John Luther Adams, Goretzky. I used to listen to Gavin Bryars. Had these beautiful soft things. Um, anything that Beethoven, even, because Beethoven's music is so dynamic. He's constantly going from really loud to really soft, to really loud to really soft. you know and I don't listen to Beethoven anymore, really. If I know it really well, like if I like the second movement of the what is that beautiful movement? Is it, you see, it's been so long I don't even recall. Is it the Eighth Symphony or the Seventh Symphony that has that gorgeous second movement? The da 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 da. You know the one I mean? Da 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 da. I mean, if it's something like that, okay, I know it, so I can recognize it. I mean, the brain tricks itself into thinking it can hear the music if you know it really well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if I know something like, oh, I don't know, let's say if I know some Tom Waits song that he sings in this sort of growly whisper, you know, the song "Town with No Cheer" that I mentioned in the first chapter of the book that I love very much. It's about an Australian bar car in a dry town, and I can't hear it anymore in the way that he sings it. But if I listen to it with these hearing aids or with my high-powered headphones, I can convince myself that I can hear it. My brain thinks it can hear it. But then what'll happen, because my condition is my hearing comes and goes from day to day. So then what will happen is I will have a day when my hearing is better, and I'll listen to it again, and I will realize my brain had been lying to me because I had missed so much of that texture. So, I used to love Fleetwood Mac. And what I can't hear anymore are Mick Fleetwood, a lot of the drums. I mean, I can hear a snare drum, but I can't hear a kick drum, or John McVeigh's bass. Well, without John McVeigh's bass or Mick Fleetwood's drums, what is Fleetwood Mac? I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to say, it's Lindsay's guitar. It's Stevie and Christine harmonizing. It is, of course, these things. That's right. But there is no, without a certain number of parts, there is no whole.
Mm-hmm. We're going to jump back into some writing questions.
Yes.
I'm curious, what is one of your favorite pieces of advice to give to your students or to any writers in general?
I mean, one thing that I tell students, there's a lot of things I tell students. I can just gibber like a gibbon for hours. You have to allow creative space for the reader. The reader has to have room in the prose where they can participate in the creative construction of meaning. A lot of young writers come to me, a lot of, particularly boys, frankly, more than girls do this, and they want to control the reader's experience. They want to put tremendous amounts of detail. Like girls do this too, I guess. They want to put tremendous amounts of detail into the story. Let me know what every little piece of furniture is in the room. Let me know what all the paintings are on the wall. Let me know when people are breathing. They'll often say, oh, he inhaled, she exhaled, you know, and I will say, you have to cut back on that. You have to cut because that's not what writing is. Writing isn't taking this perfect picture in your head and putting it in someone else's head. That's a road to failure. What you need to do instead is just sort of push the mind back in the direction you want it to go. That's all. It's like curling. You know the sport of curling, where they have where they have brooms and they're sort of sweeping the ice and they're letting this giant. What do they call that thing that moves across the ice in curling? That big thing with the handle that just kind of rolls along. There's a name for it, and I
Yeah,
can't think of it right now.
I don't remember. I'd have to Google it.
Okay, we don't have to do it right away, but it's a little bit like that. You're sweeping a path for the reader's mind to travel, right? But you're not bestrewing that path with superfluous accoutrements. I love a long and elaborate sentence, obviously, but you have to be sparing with such things. And I feel like a lot of writers come to me, fantasy is extremely popular now, although that will change, right? It changes as, every few years, what's popular changes. A lot of people want to write, they come to me saying, I want your advice on writing multi-volume fantasy novels, right? And the sort of writer who often wants to do that kind of thing wants to have this tremendous amount of control. They want to build a world and they want to have this tremendous amount of control about everything that's going to be in the world. You got to know about this kind of fur that this wolf has. It's very important. And you've got to know about all the hand grips on this staff that the wizard carries. But what they can do if they're not careful is that they can brick themselves up in this world such that no one else can get in. So leaving space and understanding that and not only space for the imagination, space for the breath. Every sentence, I think about prose too much. I think about prose a lot. Every sentence needs to have a place for the reader to breathe. Even if we're just breathing with our mind, all of this stuff is connected to the body. Even some activity that you think of as very cerebral, like reading, it all comes back to the body. And you're looking for those little places that you can breathe, and you're looking for those little places that your attention can breathe as well. Pauses, stops, traffic signals, and you need to learn how to adjust these things and be comfortable with these things. There's this panic now that AI is going to sort of take over the literary world. And, magazines, like I think Clark's World had to close their submissions for a while because they were getting all these AI submissions. People were just saying to an AI program, write a story in which the dragons, learn how to smoke. And then they all become, unable to breathe fire because they have, emphysema or whatever. And the AI will write this story. But this is just a complete misapprehension of what writing is. It's not about having some idea and filling in the details. It's about the moment to moment work of making making sentences and building that meaning up out of sentences, word by word, and pause by pause, and breath by breath. And if you try to find a way to cheat your way around that, as some people will show up to my class and say, "Oh, I want to write this 6-volume fantasy series, and I've got it all outlined, and I just want to try to burn through and write it real quick and get it out there." This is not writing. I don't know what it is. It's entrepreneurial activity of some kind or another. But really, I think it's delusion. I think writing it's like any other art. It's like music. If you show up and you say, "Oh, I want to write a symphony," well, okay, maybe you got to learn quite a lot to do that, right? You might want to start by learning how to play an instrument. You might want to start by learning how to read music. You might want to start with a smaller composition. We can all tell stories, and so we have misapprehensions about writing.
I think you brought up such a great point about how, regardless of where AI goes, it's never going to have that human quality, the spontaneity, the creative spark that makes something a original work of art from a human brain versus a computer.
I think so. I mean, although who knows? Because, now that I've said that, maybe I contradict myself. Because, 100 years ago, they were worried about this, or 75 years ago, they were worried about this when Walter Benjamin wrote, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. And he's, if you can copy a Mona Lisa and make a nice color print of it, is that just as valuable as the Mona Lisa is? Or if you can go to, if you can do, I mean, so many beautiful paintings, so many beautiful, I mean, this is what Glenn Gould was talking about when he quit performing in symphony halls, right? He quit performing live. He said, well, the future is tape. The future is long playing records. Is that just as good? If you listen to a digital, which is, already a little bit of already a step down from that long playing record, right? But if you listen to a digital, an MP3 of Glenn, or an MP4 of Glenn Gould playing, first movement of the Goldberg variations, how is that different than sitting in his practice space with him, watching him perform it? And then can we use value words? Can we use words like worse? Is it just different? I don't know. I worry it would be distracting for me to see him there hunched over in his weird posture with his little gloves on his hands, mumbling to himself as he performed. And he always wanted it freezing cold. I worry I'd be too cold, and sometimes aura itself can be distracting, right? This idea of aura. But on the other hand, sometimes there's a picture that you've seen in reproduction for years, and then you see it for real, and there's no quotes around the word real there, right? And you see details that can't be reproduced. I remember seeing a self-portrait of Picasso from his blue period in a show one time. I'm not a particular fan of Picasso. I mean, I think he's fine, whatever. I'm not here to, be critical of Picasso's paintings, as opposed to his personal life, which I will happily be critical of, right? But, when I see reproductions of that famous self-portrait from the blue period, that famous sort of melancholy self-portrait where his hair looks like a helmet, from the blue period, he has a little tiny mustache hairs across his upper lip. And in reproductions, they just look like this lame attempt to grow a mustache, right? Which you didn't see a bearded Picasso. He wasn't any good at it. But when you see the painting in real life, there's something very tender about those little wisps of hair on his upper lip. There's something very human and very immediate and very, it's like a shorthand for a soul. I don't know. It pulls you right in. It immediately pulls you in. And is that aura? I don't know if that's aura. Which maybe takes us away from AI, from the question of AI.
Yeah. But that reminds me of, I'm a musician, so sometimes we get music books with the printed, regular, lined up sheet music, and in the back there's facsimiles of what the composer wrote.
Sure.
And it's just fascinating to compare the two, one printed almost like something typed out, and the other written as though it was handwritten, like comparing a typed out grocery list to a handwritten grocery list. It's two different worlds.
Oh, bet. What are some of those differences that you notice?
Even in the neatness or not neatness, I guess untidiness of how each composer creates their notes physically, drawing them, how much space they take up on the page. Did they cross out anything? Where is that accidental? Is it actually here? And then the editor messed up and put it on the wrong note, so you go to the facsimile to find the correct answer. And it's just, there's a realness to that. And then if you're lucky enough to see a piece of music in person at like the Morgan Library, for example, or Smithsonian, it's a whole different level of peering into the soul of this artist that you don't get from the printed page, and you definitely don't get from the very nicely printed typeset page.
That's right. And of course, you can falsify things by printing it. Like you think about Emily Dickinson's poems, right? She would write them onto these little bits of paper and then bind them up with twine in these little fascicles. And is that the way to read them, to appreciate them? Is this the best way to do it? And then when people reproduce those poems, she used those little dashes all the time between her lines. But in her handwriting, the dashes are quite a bit smaller than the M dashes that are often used when they're typed up. They look more like N dashes or even like hyphens. And so should we reproduce that? But on the other hand, some people want to hide that soul that they have. I know, why would anyone want to hide something as beautiful as a soul? Nonetheless, they do. I'm one of those people. For example, if someone were to say, "Oh, why read Losing Music, the book, when you can read his original handwritten drafts with all the misspellings and the crossing out and the coffee stains?" I would say, "Oh, I'd rather you not do that. I'd rather hide behind this regularized printed page."
As a person who also writes, I definitely wouldn't want my drafts exposed to the public.
No, no, not at
Definitely
all.
not. Yeah, but it is fascinating to see that of other artists, just not myself.
Yeah, it's difficult as a writer, as an artist. Sometimes you begin things and the beginnings are so promising and then they don't end up coming to very much. And then you have this question of, well, what do you do with these beginnings? With this collection of beginnings or fragments, right? If you read poetry, you read the collected Shelley or collected Keats, they'll always have a little thing that says fragment, and it's just some little scrap of poetry. Of course, if you're a famous writer, you can sell them to the ransom center, right? And that's how you fund your beach house in your later years or your prescriptions. But if you're just a regular old working artist, what do you do with all these things? I was having dinner with this famous poetry critic. I won't mention his name. He just died. Well, we were talking about notebooks, and someone was saying, "Oh, they use their phone. They use their notebook app on their phone to write notes." And I said, "Oh, I just carry these little notebooks with me and write ideas down." And the famous poetry critic, who I liked, I don't mean to, but a famous poetry critic said, "I would never do that." He says, "I do not carry a notebook, never." And I said, "Well, what do you do if there's a thought that you want to write down and you're worried you'll lose it?" He said, "Then it was meant to be lost."
Interesting.
You know, uh, what do you do? Do you have a little notebook?
In an ideal world, yes, because I love the idea of the tactile and the organicness of writing a thought out. But in the realities of day to day, it's more often an electronic note.
Yeah, I know. And then they just accumulate. I remember reading Gary Indiana's memoir. He has facsimiles of some of his notebook pages from his old notebooks. And he talks about how he wishes he could have used the notebooks more in composing the book, but it's lists of directions, it's lists of groceries. It's a bit of a fragment of a thought that wasn't completed. If only we had all the hours in our lives to finish all these thoughts that we scribble down.
Yeah. One time, though, I was in college and I was getting ready to go to my job at the grocery store, and it was like 6 a.m, super early. And I had this poem just fully fledged pop into my head. And all I had was a napkin, like a paper napkin. So I smudged it on the paper napkin, typed it up later. That same poem I ended up, placing in a competition like several years ago and printed in my college literary magazine and things like that. And I didn't have to do any tweaking other than maybe a comma or something,
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is. It's a beautiful moment.
That's right. We get them every once in a while. You got to keep that signal open.
Yeah.
It was like the first short story that I ever wrote was very good. But then I didn't write another good story for about a decade. It just came to me. It just came out of the air. It just came over the antenna.
For me, poetry is like that. It just sort of, into my brain, almost fully formed. But I can't do that with anything else. Prose, song lyrics, nothing. Just poetry.
Good for you. Do you remember them? Can you keep them in your head?
No. That's the thing. I got to write those down or else they're gone forever.
Really?
Yeah.
I used to be able to keep them in my head better than I can now. They get strangled now. There's too much other stuff rolling around.
You've got a lot of things packed in your head because you've got a lot of projects going on all at once.
I guess I do. I guess I do. Well, you have to have reasons to get out of bed in the morning,
Hmm.
you know? I mean, I haven't got kids. I'm not a fireman. I don't, nothing's going to get me out of bed. There's not going to be a bell ringing that sends me up unless I say, okay, well, what do I want to work on? What do I, what's driving me today? I mean, I don't know. I guess work would get me out of bed. Maybe I mean something else. Maybe I mean a reason to want to go on, maybe a reason to drag my carcass through this bitch of a life, and I need something. I need something for this. And so you have to have these projects that you're passionate about, you know, and you have to let yourself be a kind of an eccentric character if you need to be. I saw a documentary the other day about Arnett Coleman. You ever listen to that guy?
The name sounds familiar. Yes.
Yeah, he was a jazz musician, and well, he was a jazz musician, but he was just an artist. He was just this unique and wonderful character. He was influential in free jazz, in this idea that you don't even have to start with a composition that you're working variations off of. You just start nowhere. You just start in the air and you just roll. But he had this very elaborate way that he thought about his own composition. So I saw this documentary about him, and he's clearly just a huge weirdo. He's clearly just this very unusual character. He bought this old elementary school he was trying to turn into a art center, and it was obvious that it wasn't going to work out, and it was in a terrible neighborhood. He got beat up a few different times going in and out of this art center, but he just had this incredible belief in it. I don't think anything came of it, but he just had this steel belief in it. He told a story about going to see Buckminster Fuller, and Buckminster Fuller described a geodesic dome for the first time. And Arnett Coleman thought to himself, I could make a piece of music that was like a geodesic dome. And then he went and did it, just having this wonderful strength of will to go and do that. And I like to try to challenge myself and say, do you believe in yourself enough that if something came to you like this, that you wanted to make a geodesic dome of music, do you believe in yourself enough that you would do it? Because I feel like we defeat ourselves sometimes, don't we? We have these wonderful impulses, and then, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and we're not working on them. I don't know. Do you feel like that's something you wrestle with ever? Belief in yourself? I wrestle with it.
I used to growing up. Now I think I just wrestle with, am I ever going to finish anything?
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And how are you going to finish something?
Well, there's never really enough time.
What do you most want to finish?
Oh, that's a great question. I have about 6 novels in progress, and I love all of those in progress novels equally. And I wish I had the ability to work on all of them simultaneously.
Yeah.
But that's humanly impossible. So it frustrates me that I can't sit down and be disciplined enough to finish the one before going on to the other, because I get so excited and passionate about all of them again equally. So I had to poll my friends and say, okay, which ones of these do you like the most?
Oh.
That's what I'm going to work on.
Yeah.
And of course they all came up with different answers. I'm like, that's fabulous.
I know. I wish you'd checked in with me. I would have told you not to ask your friends. Because whatever answer they give you is not going to matter. It's about what you want, and you have to resolve in your head. Like if I said to you, okay, real quick, which one?
Oh my gosh.
Real quick. No, I said real quick. You're waiting too long. I said real quick.
I guess I'd say the historical novel, because it's the only one like it in my pile.
What period is it set in?
1790 in England.
1790 in England. Oh, so is it like a Regency novel?
Sort of, yes. Except I don't really focus so much on the time period, so much as the socioeconomic aspects of the time period. That's why I picked it.
Yeah. So what specifically about them? I'm trying to think of what's going on in 1790. I mean, the French Revolution is about to happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Right. And then there's still so much of a class system and, a hierarchy and royalty and servants and things of that nature. And
Oh yeah,
so,
it's the ancient regime. No one has started to modernize, at all. So it's the height of this to some extent. Yeah.
so it's a very upstairs, downstairs culture still. And so I like using that to play the characters against each other. So,
Oh yeah, of course. Well, how are you going to find the time to finish the book? Tell me.
I
And you
just
have to
won't
tell me.
sleep. I just won't sleep, John. There's no sleeping
Oh,
happening.
you know what I tell my students? I say you have to pick something to be bad at. I say when I wrote my first novel, I was kind of a bad employee. You know? And when I wrote my memoir, I didn't have much of a social life. I pushed people away. And now, I have another book I want to write. And so I have to let something go. When I wrote the book that I've written most recently, that we're going to see who might want it. When I wrote that book, I wasn't taking care of my, mental health all that much. And so for my next book, what will it be that I'm not any good at? Because you can't do everything.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
can't. And I feel like we want to, and we're indirectly, making clear what we value. But I don't know that it's always, sometimes we're living for others. Sometimes we're trying to do what we think is valuable to other people. And we only have one life. I think, when I wrote my first novel, I was working 9 to 5 and I was commuting an hour both ways. Because I was living in Boston and commuting to Marblehead. Well, that eats a lot of the day,
It
you know.
does.
So I knew that once I did the drive home, particularly in that traffic on 95, or sometimes I would take one all the way down. That's trafficy too. There was no way that I was going to be able to work on the novel. There's just no way I could do it. So what I did is I would pull over at a coffee shop near where I worked, and I would get a coffee at 5 in the evening, 5:30, and just sit there writing for 2 hours. And then I would drive home, and I get home and it was dark and late. It's not the ideal way to live, but I got the novel written. Or with losing music, I would write first thing in the morning. For a long time, I woke up early. I would reach for my laptop before I even got out of bed and start writing and make sure that I wrote, 500 words or 700 words or however many I needed to draft before I even got out of bed, and I would try to wake up early enough to make that happen. It's difficult. It's hard, and sometimes people will sign up for a writing class with me, and they'll say I have a novel to work on, and I'll say, well, what's keeping you from writing it? And they'll say, well, my partner's pregnant, and our second child is going through trouble, at school, and I'm starting a new job, and also my second job is getting a little more busy, and my mother just got admitted to hospice, and and I'm taking golfing lessons, and our dog has got intestinal issues, and we're buying a new house, and we're selling a boat, and I have to be in New Zealand by next week. And I'll say to them, well, you can't write a novel. You're not going to be able to do it. Come back when you have the time.
It definitely, not just for novels, but any kind of creative pursuit, it takes a certain amount of self-discipline. And like you said, putting a few things to the side as much as you can and still being able to live.
And still being able to live. Well, that's the hard thing, is because life is so fucking hard now. Back in the 1970s, we glamorize it. Well, we're right to glamorize it. Back in the 1970s, you could get an apartment in a major metropolitan area. You could pay what, $10 a month for rent, $20, candy wrapper for rent every month, right? And you could work 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week. The way that people describe the jobs they had in the 1970s, it makes you turn green. They'll say, oh, well, yeah, they needed someone to be a night watchman at this place, but we just wrote. I mean, William Faulkner wrote Sound and the Fury while he was working as a night watchman. He set up with his typewriter. You couldn't do that now because you'd be monitored by closed circuit cameras by your employers. They have software now that monitors when you're looking at your screen and when you're not looking at your screen.
Yeah, scary stuff for sure.
It's feudal. It's neo-feudal. It's not possible to live and work in the same way. It's a miracle when people can do it.
Mhm.
Most of the writers I know have pretty punishing day jobs, unless they're lucky enough to be tenured somewhere. And even then, that can sometimes take time and effort. I don't know. And so it's a miracle if they're able to write a novel every few years or every 10 years. But then sometimes they do, and it's amazing. It's beautiful. And that's what they're living for. It's what I'm living for.
That sort of goes along the lines of when we talked about last time about living a creative life and what that means. Do you have anything else or different to add to what you had said before?
One thing that I tell my students, sometimes people will want to start diaries or journals, but it feels too all consuming because you feel as though you need to put in every detail, or you'll feel like you need to do it every day, or you'll feel as though you don't know what to say, or you'll feel as though when you write, you're not being loyal to yourself, to the reality of the experience. I don't know. Well, so the advice I give people is to pick one striking thing every day and just write about that. 10 minutes every day in one journal. I'd like it if it was a physical journal, but you can make it a Word document. Just put every new entry at the top. That's okay too. Write about the thing that you found most striking that day, right? Which can be a sight, a sound. It doesn't have to come in through your senses five. It can just be an idea.
Hmm.
All right. One striking thing each day, one page, half a page, then you're done. That's it. And even this little bit of creative work will not only make you a better writer, because you're working with language this whole time and you're developing your facility with language. That's how you get to Carnegie Hall. But it'll also make you a better observer of the world. You'll begin to look for those striking moments. You'll want to make sure they're not all the same. And you'll also determine what kind of artist you are. Because maybe you're an artist like Monet, who returns to the same haystack every day and captures it in different light and under different conditions. Or maybe you're someone who wants to drive home a different route every day so you can see something new. Or maybe you're someone who overhears a conversation and becomes part of it because this is the striking thing. Or maybe you're someone who pushes yourself intellectually. Every day when you get home from work, you pull out, the Kierkegaard, or you pull out, Simone Weil, or Judith Butler, and sit there with it and push yourself because it's the complexity of the idea, the solidity and weirdness and complexity and an unusual shape of that idea. That's the thing that's striking you. And by finding a new thing every day, by pushing yourself to locate a new thing every day, you make your life bigger.
I love that. John, you always have such wonderful, insightful things to say. It's been a delight to have you back on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure to be here, Tammy. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you do here.
You're welcome. Listeners, please check out the show notes and check John Cotter's website and also run to the bookstores on April 11th to get his memoir, Losing Music.
If your listeners feel like picking up a copy of Losing Music, and it's up to them, I'm not going to coerce them in any way, but I think they should. I think they're bad people if they don't. I would love it if they could go to an independent bookstore, because that'll
second that. Yep.
Support independent businesses, keep the money local. It also puts the book on the radar of these independent bookstores too, so it works out for me. So
excellent.
Anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Run to the independent bookstores. I definitely agree. Thanks always, and have a good one. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.